You're listening to Where You Live with Gene and Tony.
That's right. Sweeping changes in landlord-tenant law. Are they good or are they bad? Those are the questions we're going to be asking next. Our resident professional and expert, Tony Crockett, as we scanned this last week all the different states, and we tried to ask the question, where is there major legislation that's being changed as it pertains to landlords and tenants? Interesting enough, Tony, we could have filled a couple of shows with what's going on. So apparently legislators everywhere across this great land of ours are kind of feeling that a lot of things need to change. And we're going to find out what some of those are in just a few of those states coming up. But I want to just say welcome back to Where You Live, folks. We're broadcasting from the Natural Green Lawn and Landscape Studios. We're brought to you by Extreme Exteriors and American Family Insurance, the Kim Bennett Agency. Now, Tony, I tried to pick a couple here from several states that were quite a bit different than what we know to be true here in Minnesota. Okay? Here's one that's interesting, and this comes from our neighbor of Wisconsin, okay, concerning abandoned property. Now, if someone leaves a home that a unit that they've been renting out, what is a landlord in Minnesota required to do if personal property has been left behind?
Yeah, well, this legislation, actually, this rule changed in Minnesota rather recently.
Okay.
2010, new legislation was passed by the state legislature called the Tenant's Bill of Rights, and one of the issues actually helped landlords in the Tenant's Bill of Rights. In Minnesota, if a renter leaves property behind after they vacate, the landlord is required to store it for 28 days before disposing of it.
Now, before that, it was a lot longer, wasn't it?
Before that, it was 60 days.
Yeah.
We were required to store someone's belongings. So what this did was it left the land, if it was valuable, if it was property of value. So this left the landlord in the position of trying to decide, okay, is
that's
this
a subjective
value?
thing in and of itself,
absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely it is. Is this is this broken down desk of value, or can I toss it? Certainly, we could toss things immediately that had no value. So opened food, for example, that was pretty clear cut.
Okay.
We could throw that. But how about unopened food? Is that of value? Is that something we should save for 28 days? Furniture, trash, stuff that looks, piles of clothes. Do we have to say this? So most landlords will save almost everything just to be on the safe side. And sometimes you can do that on the premises. If you have storage space or if you have an extra garage or something like that, you can move all that stuff to that garage and store it. But many landlords don't have any extra space in which to store stuff. And the other problem it causes is pest problems.
Yeah.
If you think about the bed bug problem that's been sweeping the country, if you're storing someone's mattresses and furniture, and those things are infested somehow, you're only exacerbating that problem.
Part of the law did say that they could move it off the premise if they paid for the transportation and paid for the for that property to be put in other storage facilities.
If who paid for that?
The landlord could put it in those in some other property. The problem is that costs additional money. The landlord's already missed rent. Already had to have costs.
Well, that's the presumption. Someone who's not always did they owe rent, but if they've vacated and left behind property, they're probably very unlikely to reimburse the landlord his costs of storage and or transporting those things. So we were all very happy in 2010 when they cut that 2-month or 60-day requirement down to 28 days. Now in Wisconsin, they've gone even further.
Yes. And so let's talk about that. They talk about what's called the Act 143, and it says here that it allows landlords to dispose of a tenant's abandoned personal property immediately at the landlord's discretion as long as the landlord has provided notice to the tenant of their intent to do so when the tenant signed the rental agreement and on each renewal.
That
What do you
sounds
think?
completely reasonable to me.
Doesn't it?
Absolutely. If we have so many clauses in our lease because of issues like this that spell out exactly what's going to happen, I think this would be a great thing to adopt in the state of Minnesota. We tell people up front, if any property you leave behind when you vacate, we're going to dispose of at our own discretion. So don't leave anything of value behind.
Yes.
They sign off on that. We're all protected, and landlords can get those places turned over quickly. They can clean out old food, old furniture that may be harboring pests. It would help tremendously.
Yes. I mean, there has been some people who have been unscrupulous and have taken advantage where they had things that were dumpy. They left because of being evicted, didn't have proper vehicles for moving things, and then ended up putting this responsibility on the shoulders of the landlord in addition to everything else.
Yeah.
And then if the landlord did throw it away and didn't abide by this, and think about it, the landlord not getting any rent and having to not want to pay additional money to put it in other storage, and now going without rent continually, even as this person has left and continues to have to store it for 27 days and was formerly 60. That to me just doesn't make
unreasonable.
sense.
And you know what? In 28 years of being involved in rental property management, I can't remember a single instance where a renter came back and said, I want that thing I left here in this apartment last month. I have never, ever, ever seen that happen. When they move out and they leave stuff behind, they've cut loose.
But the law says you have to, and so they do.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. It does make so much sense. Common sense, what we've talked about. If you have two adults who understand what the agreement is going in at the very beginning, why shouldn't they have the ability to state what that is?
That's right.
They do on when the date of rent and when that's going to be accepted.
When that's due. That's
what
right.
the amount is, what the security deposit is.
We can agree on that in
They can
advance.
do it on so many other areas, but it just seems a little too big brother for our state to get involved with something that they really don't need
they're
to.
taking care of people who don't even necessarily want to be cared for in this way.
Okay. Here's another prohibition here of Act 143 in Wisconsin here. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. It says Act 143 also prohibits inclusion of any provision that allows the landlord to terminate the rental agreement if a crime is committed on the property, even if the crime could not have been prevented by the tenant.
This is kind of interesting because in Minnesota, more and more and more communities, cities, are adopting what they call the crime-free housing addendum or a crime-free housing plan. And in cities that do this, they give landlords an addendum to add to their lease that specifically says if this tenant commits a crime on this property, he may be evicted. So landlords have included that in their leases because many cities require it. It also protects the landlord to some degree because it doesn't say we have to prove that these people are guilty, but if we have police reports that they suspected marijuana was being sold, or if there's domestic after domestic after domestic, that helps us get rid of bad citizens.
It makes sense because a lot of these same municipalities and cities also have additional laws and ordinance in place that refer to properties as being problem properties, or what's the word I'm looking for?
I can't think of it now either, but they will hold landlords responsible for the behavior of their tenants.
Yes.
So it's interesting that Wisconsin went the other way with this. They don't like this idea that landlords can hold the tenants responsible for criminal acts on the property, even if that tenant was not involved in that specific act at that time.
And to me, it makes sense because here we've taken this out of being subjective and it becomes objective because the police were involved. A third party, disinterested, came in, looked at things, and
That's
they said,
right.
hey, that's what the police do.
That's
They that is their job. And they
That's
said that illegal activity took place here. A crime was
That's right.
committed here. And so now you should be able to say, you're a bad egg. You're out of here.
That's right. Or even if you are not the person that committed the crime, your friends or your family or your acquaintances are causing problems here, so we want to get rid of you. What's interesting is I've had cities come to me and say, okay, we've had 3 police calls to this unit. We want you to evict these people. And I tell them, okay, I'm going to give them 1 month's notice or sometimes 2 months' notice because I want to protect my landlord. And they'll say, why do you have to do that? We're giving you the police report. It's a crime. They have to get out of there. And the reason I have to do that is because the courts, housing court, doesn't support landlords and police in these issues. They usually support the tenant because they don't want people to be homeless. So if I go into court and say, this family of 5 with 3 children, I kicked them out with 2 days' notice.
Yeah.
The court's going to say, you're crazy. You can't do that.
And to me, it seems to make sense. Here you are ignoring the many good people in the market who are renting because of trying to protect the right of this one bad
these
egg.
few that are causing trouble. Good point.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we've got a lot more with sweeping changes in landlord-tenant laws around this great land of ours after these messages.